today we're going to learn how to draw an animal character on the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil 2. I have a case for mine and a screen protector. The screen protector I got from Amazon. It's kind of like a paper-like material. So when you draw, it feels like you're drawing on paper. I mean, not exactly, but you know. Okay. So you're going to want to download the Procreate program from the App Store. I believe it works with different operating systems, but what I have is the Apple iPad. So I downloaded my Procreate, and I think it was $10 when I downloaded it. It could be more now, but it's a one-time payment, and once you pay for it, you get the app. You can start drawing right away. They have ink, like pens and things already set in the program and everything. And the amount of things you can do with the program, honestly, it's worth it. So, especially if you're like an artist just starting out or even not starting out. So once you open Procreate, you get sort of a board like this. I think when you first open it, they have a few pieces from other artists kind of to show you what the program can do. Today we're going to learn how to draw owls. And these succulent owls will be available in the sticker shop very soon. Not now, but it will be available soon. And we're going to learn how to draw one of these just together. And this is my process of how I do create stickers, how I draw certain things. My style is more of a anime / cell style. So I like to do line work, and I like to do cell style painting. So let's get started. When you open Procreate, there's a plus sign on the top right hand corner. You want to click that. When you click that, it has different settings. This is basically to create a new canvas, and it has different settings such as square, 4K, A4, 4x6, and paper. You can also create a new canvas of your liking by clicking the plus box sign beside new canvas. And that'll open up a panel that has dimensions, color profile, time lapse settings, and canvas properties. To change the settings of the canvas, you want to be in dimensions, and you want to set it to whatever width and height that you feel comfortable drawing in. I usually like to set it to 8.5 by 11, which is letter size paper. It's usually what I'm used to drawing in my sketchbook. Some people like to set theirs as a square because Instagram already has the grid platform, so you're drawing it specifically for social media. But it all depends on what you're going to do with these, like with your drawings. So my drawing, I already know it's going to be a sticker. So I usually like to make 8.5 by 11, and then I like to do 300 DPI. DPI is dots per inch. There's also PPI, which stands for pixels per inch. And that's basically the resolution, which is the quality of the drawing or photo or whatever you're doing. I like to set mine at 300 because 300 is the perfect sort of DPI for print. And I know I'm going to be printing it on stickers, and further on down the line, maybe I want to do fabric. Maybe I would want it on a t-shirt. Either way, it has to be at least 300 DPI to be a very good quality for any type of printing. If you're only doing screen or digital download, then I would say 120 DPI to 72 DPI is fine, so long as you're not drawing it at like a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter or something like that. But for my purpose here, there's width, height, DPI, and maximum layers. So you can set how many layers you want in the program. Now, I already have a preset canvas, but this is where you would change your sizing. So I would click the untitled one, which I really should title them, 8.5 by 11. So there's my brand new canvas. Now, once you've created a new canvas, the first thing, and I'll go through the tools with you very slowly, there are some things that I will not go into just because there's a lot of things in Procreate that you can do and you can learn. But for our purpose, I'll only be teaching the stuff that will help you draw the owl. So the circle up here, this white circle is your color palette. You can choose different types. You can see it in disc form, which has under here. You can see it in classic form. There's harmonies where you can pick 2 different colors, value, and palettes. I usually go with classic. That's what I'm used to. I think my husband uses a disc. That's what he's used to. So it just depends on what you feel like, how you feel comfortable. So I feel comfortable with classic, especially since it has the history, and then you can create color palettes down here too if you feel like it. And I leave it at that. The 2 squares beside the colors is your layers. Now, this one is really important because every single line work, color work will require a layer. For layers, if you swipe left, they'll give you some options. So you'll have clear, duplicate, and lock. So say you draw a whole bunch of stuff on your one layer and you don't want it anymore. It's garbage. You want to throw it out. You would go to the layer and swipe left and click clear. So you can use the same layer again, but it'll clear everything that's on the layer. So say I drew a happy face or something, some demented happy face there, but yeah. So then I would go here, I don't want this. It doesn't look great. So I go here and I clear it off. The plus sign at the top will add layers on top of layers. Very important. You can also delete layers and not just clear them. And then you can also, if you tap on the layer, you get on the left-hand side, rename, select, copy, fill layer, clear, alpha lock, mask, invert, and reference. So normally when you start a project, you want to name your layers. I don't usually do that because I get lazy sometimes, and I know for my reference what layers are what. The most important one here is probably the clear and the mask. They have layer masks and clipping masks. So say I created a new layer. Say I colored this layer with a box. And then say I go to the thing. There's mask and there's clipping mask. You can click a clipping mask, and what that essentially does is anywhere inside that box that's on top of this, you're on top of the normal layer. So anywhere inside of that box, you can color in and it won't go outside of the box. So say I colored in with a different color. Say I colored in with a darker color. Well, I'm coloring in, but it's not going outside the box. So that is a clipping mask. Very important for later. So there's the layers. And again, swipe left gives you options. Tapping on the layer gives you options. And also clicking on the N button gives you filter options. But you want to keep it at normal for now. Then there's the tick box next to the layer, which makes the layer disappear and reappear. This is if you don't want the layer to be there or like to see it, but you still want to keep the layer. Then background, you can change the color, which I typically like to do right at the beginning. I typically like to change the color to a softer brown, light pink, whatever you want, just to see where colors go outside of the lines. And also, I find white really, really harsh on the eyes. Then you have the eraser tool. So then you have the brush tool, and that one has sketching, inking, drawing, calligraphy, painting, artistic, and airbrush, and etc. Ignore the ones on the top. These ones I actually downloaded from somewhere. I didn't create them, someone else did, but I use them every now and then for particular work that I do. But for this project, we're going to use inking and the studio pen. So when drawing, I usually use a brown color, close to black, but not really black, because I find black really harsh. So I usually use something that's a little bit more brown. And the studio pen. So with the studio pen, and I'll explain what this is later. This is the studio pen. So studio pen. So with the studio pen, on the left-hand side here, this little dial. The top one, the higher you go up with the dial, the bigger your pen becomes. The lower one, the lower you go with this dial here, the more the opacity disappears. And what I mean by opacity is if you have it at 100%, it'll look like that. If you move down a little bit, it'll start looking more opaque. Not opaque, translucent. And then when you do this, again, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So that's what these two do. But the Studio Pen, to be aware, I like using this because when you ink a foreground and you press really hard, it creates a thicker line. But if you don't press that hard, you press lightly, it creates a thin line. So you have sort of control over where things are thick and where things are thin within your drawing. And that's why I like to use the Studio Pen. So that's one of the pens we'll be using for this particular drawing. The other pen I use is the Technical Pen. Technical Pen is one thickness. It's kind of a thinner brush. Technical. Again, the harder you press, the lighter you press, again, the thickness changes. It does allow you more control, but the Studio Pen has more of a thick, thin flow. This one is a little bit more restrictive in what you can do. So we'll also be using this one. I usually use it to do the gesture drawing or the shape drawing underneath everything. Gesture drawing, as I said, is more for layout. Shape drawing is more what we'll be doing in this one. So that's what I use the Technical Pen for. The other one I use is for texture. So I use this whenever I want to create sort of a nice texture on top of the painting. So the first one that I use under textures in the brush library is Signet. Is Signet. This one I use anytime there's sort of a dirty texture, like, you know, you're doing soil or you're doing a wall, but it's wallpaper that has a bit of texture to it, or it's, or you want to do sort of a feathery look. I would use this texture and then do a Gaussian blur to soften the texture depending on what I'm drawing. So that's another one that I use. Another one I use, and we probably won't be using it for this project, but this one is Dove Lake. This one I use, so Dove Lake I use anytime there's a metallic texture or anything that looks sort of like a grainy, hard metal texture. I use it for that. And then even concrete, sometimes I use it for that as well. And the last one I use, and I'm going to butcher the name of this, is Melaleuca. And it looks like this. So Melaleuca I use anytime there's a wood grain or a grain of some kind that goes diagonally or horizontally, and I want to create that kind of texture. That's what I use. But for this project, we'll mostly be using the Studio Pen, the Technical Pen, and Signet. These two are used for a completely different thing. But I just wanted to show you the brushes that I technically use for what I do. I also use airbrush sometimes, but we all, you know what that one does. Then the finger tool, or the finger icon, is the Smudge Tool. And what that does is basically, when you're drawing with a pencil, you can take your finger and pretty much smudge the pencil to shade in an area, or you can use that like little stick tool to smudge the pencil. Well, that's what this does. So if you go to a little piece and you start using that tool over here, it smudges the ink to create sort of a airbrushy effect, right? Now, also with the eraser tool, the eraser and the pen tool, they kind of work the same. So if say you're using an airbrush, a soft airbrush to shade in an area, but then you don't want this piece, oh no, it's sticking out, and you want to erase it, but you want to erase it with the same brush. So as I said, the eraser tool works like the pen tool. So you can select the same brush that you could select as a brush tool as an eraser and erase that area so that you still have the soft spot there. And yeah, that's all the brushes that I'll be using for this project. So let's clear off this. I'll describe to you what these tools do on the left-hand side. So the arrow tool is the move tool. And what that means is when you have a circle, for instance, and you don't want it over here, you want it over here, you can select the move tool and pretty much move it wherever you want on the canvas. When you open the move tool, it'll open a panel at the bottom, and that panel has different options as well, where it has freeform, uniform, distort, and warp. Freeform just means you can move it around however you like. Uniform is you can scale it up and down, but it can only scale at a fixed point, so it'll always scale at the same size up and down. Distort means you can pretty much distort it however you like, which, move the bottom or the top however, or the angles here. And warp is basically you can warp an object. You can move the inside of it out and move it around, flip it, that kind of thing. Then you have advanced mesh, flip horizontally, flip vertically, 45 degree, fit to screen, reset, and bilinear. The only one you'll need for this project is the flip horizontally. So the other ones, I can explain at a later date. This tool here, the one that looks like an S, is the selection tool. What this does, it means you can select anything that is on the canvas. And you can select it in different ways. You can select it by selecting it automatically, freehand, rectangular, or ellipse. So it creates the same box underneath that the move tool created. And I usually use freehand. So you can draw what you want to select, and then you can take the move tool and then move it. Well, you have to put the move tool back to uniform. You can select the whole object, and then you can do whatever you want to that selection. Whether that be copy paste, whether that be moving it around, etc., etc. So that's what that tool does. The tool next to it is similar to that. It's the magic wand tool. At least it looks like a magic wand, but it does something different than the selection. So the selection is technically what you would call the magic wand tool in Photoshop. This particular tool does things like changing the color of something on the layer, changing the brightness of something on the layer. So say I wanted to change this I wanted it to be lighter, then I could move the slider of brightness to make it lighter. Or I can change the color of it to something else, or I can change the saturation. You can also change the color balance, the curves, the gradient map, Gaussian blur, motion blur, perspective blur, and etc. For this project, we'll be using the Gaussian blur. So keep that in mind. But this is basically adjustments to the canvas or your drawing. And it usually adjusts to the layer. The wrench tool beside that magic wand tool is where you're going to export your stuff, export a video, export a JPEG, crop and edit the canvas, add a file or a photo, any of that stuff. Or even open a reference panel where you can take a JPEG from something that you need to look at. Instead of looking at it on your phone or on another screen, you can open a tiny little reference panel and put that inside the drawing, which I can show you guys at a later date. But for this one, it's just drawing the owl. So let's clear this and let's start drawing. So I'm gonna take my technical pen, gonna choose the color that I chose. So what you wanna do is draw a circle. You draw the circle, you hold it down, and it creates an ellipse. Now, if the circle is not as straight as you like it, because like when you do hold it down, the program automatically creates an ellipse for you. You can edit the shape at the top. It'll have a button that says edit shape. This is only if you've released it correctly. And you can change it to a circle, or you can take the anchor points that show up and move it around so that it looks the way you want it. We want it to be a circle, so just gonna do that. To get rid of this little menu, you just click off or click the move tool. So that's our circle. Now, with any kind of like head or face that's front view, you want an eye line and a T line. I think it's called the meridian line, but I can't remember. It's basically to make sure that everything is symmetric. So if this was a human head, it would be oval, not a circle, but because it's a chibi owl that we're drawing, it's a circle. But if it was a human head, you'd have the ears where the eye line is, and then you'd have the eyes on both sides, and then you'd have the nose in the middle. But again, we're doing an owl. So that's the head, and it's a circle. The body of the owl is an oval. So let's draw another circle underneath, but make it more of an oval. And because I want the owl to have more of a flattened look, more of a distorted look. Hang on. So we're going to do the body, and then you just create an oval, and then you edit the shape, and you can move it around so that it's centered. And I want my owl to look a little bit more on the chunky side, so I'm going to squeeze the bottom anchor in a little bit, and then I'm going to take the selection tool, the S tool, select the bottom only, and then go to the move tool and click distort at the bottom. So I'm going to take the angle in at one side here and the angle in at another side here and make the bottom two anchor points fatter and move it down a little. So that was the distort tool, and I distorted it so the oval is more of an oval, but it's squeezed in at the top where the neck, this part here, would meet. So you want to do a middle line here and another line over here. This will determine where the wings go. This is the middle of the body. And when we think about wings, we think about the shape of the wing. So as I said before, with animals or anything that you're drawing, you want to break it down into shapes. You want to make sure that you think about what builds that specific object. So for instance, if you're drawing, say, an arm or a hand, the hand part here would be a square, right? The fingers would be rectangles. So there's 5 rectangles. Then from the wrist to the elbow would be a skewed rectangle. And any joints that you have that bend would be a circle. So there'd be a circle here, a circle here, a circle here, a circle here, and it gets divided up. And that's how drawing works for pretty much anything. You break it down into shapes, you look at an object and think, what kind of shape is that? Could it be a triangle? Could it be a circle? Could it be a rectangle? And you simplify it. And once you simplify it, you get it down on the paper, and this is the first step. So we're gonna put in the wings, and that should join where the shoulders are. So oval, oval. Then you want feet, which you can do a circle just for placement of where the feet should go. I know owl's feet are more of a triangle shape, but this is just for placement. And then create an eye where the eye line should be. Another eye. And another trick for this, another trick is to fill an object, you can just drag and drop it into the area that you want to color. Hang on. So what I mean by that is if you have an object like a rectangle like this, you can take the color that you have and drag and drop it into the box, and it'll fill the box up. So I'm just gonna color this one in though, because it's rough. And then the beak, you know, so this is the rough layout of that. And once that's done, you'll go into the layers and you'll go into your opacity and you'll bring the opacity down. The way you do that is you click on the layer where the N is, the normal, and underneath the N and the layer will be opacity. So you can just take the slider and slide it back to, I don't know, say 35. Then you'll want to create a layer on top of that to refine the final work a little bit more. So you'll want to create more details within the next layer, just so you know what you're doing. Because I know that obviously the owl has cheeks, it has feathers, you know, there's things that I want to add into it. There's, you know, and the feet are, I know they're little triangles, so I want to add in that detail now, roughly. Doesn't have to be perfect. So with the feathers, I usually create little arcs. So I'll draw like, I'll do half circle, half circle, half circle almost. So there should be a cheek here somewhere. And you're using the shape underneath as a guideline. So it's still, like, you still need that to be there, you just don't want it to be prominent. So we're just gonna do this. And then I'm like, I want him to have a little bit of feathery tuft up top. So here, let's give him a little bit of tufts. You know, and I want the wings here to go over. But we know that the wings have to join to the body, so we don't start right here by the shoulder. We start a little bit further down from that shape. And we want to make the bottom a bit fatter than the circle that is drawn there. So you want to do this to the other side, very roughly. And again, you don't want the wing to join as one continuous thing, just because there's a joint here where the wing should be. The circle area is where the feet are supposed to go, so we'll do a 3-prong triangle. You just curve the triangle a little bit. Where the feet would go. And again, this can be rough. It doesn't have to be finalized. The next layer we'll have to do this cleanly, but this is the layer where you just want to add in your details. Okay, so we'll hide the layer that has the shapes for now by clicking on the box on the right hand side. The layer's still there, you're just hiding it. Then we're going to take this one and bring down the opacity by clicking the layer on the end and bringing down the opacity to roughly 30 or 40, so you can still see it. Then you're going to want to create a new layer, and we're going to grab our studio pen. And we're going to start refining the work. We're going to make it a bit more refined, fix things that we see here that may not necessarily be correct. Or doesn't look correct in a certain way. So we want the lines to be clean, and I want to use a thicker size of the pen. And we're just going to go along and try and trace as best we can on this layer. but make the lines as clean as you possibly can. So here's the cheeks, and you're just gonna trace. And here's a tip. So when a drawing is front view like this, in Procreate, you only need to draw one side. This is kind of a cheat. So if it's front view, you can take half of your drawing, duplicate the layer, and then flip it, and then bring that other half to the right half and join them together. So we're gonna do that simply because it makes things so much easier and so much faster. So here I noticed that the shoulder is not rounded off. It's kind of a little weird. So in my finalized version, I'm gonna include a little bit more puff there and decrease the wing size a little bit because it's a little bit too far out. And again, I'm doing the little arcs as clean as possible because I want my owl to be very fluffy and very chubby. Just trace the bottom and make it fat. Okay. So the eye I notice is a little bit too much like a alien looking, so I want it to be a complete circle. I don't want it to be too oval. And again, you can drag and drop to fill. I want the cheeks to be a little bit more of a flat oval than the circle that I created. And create tough. Okay. So when you make that disappear, obviously there's half of the drawing. Now what you want to do is take the layer that has the inking that you did, that was only half, flip to the left-hand side of a layer and click duplicate. Once you've duplicated that, click the move tool, flip it horizontally, make sure you're on uniform in the move tool, and move it over so that it aligns together with the beak. Now, the one thing I forgot to do was draw on the feet, so you would draw on the feet too, but I didn't do that, which I'll do after. Then you're gonna wanna take this, because you take a look at it, it has hair on this side too, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna erase it on this side only, on this layer. So we only have one. And then I'm gonna merge the layers. To do that, you have to take the top layer and the bottom layer, take your fingers and squeeze the layers together. This merges the layers into one, and you can make the bottom one disappear after, but we are going to draw the feet in first. So because I skipped a step and I didn't put them in when I drew half the drawing, I'm just putting them in quickly now. Okay. Let's hide the layer underneath. So you still have the two layers, the shape layer and the rough layer. Your final inking layer is this one. And at this time you can take a look at your drawing and clean it up, clean up the lines, clean up any bits that you see that don't really look right to you. So here I'd have to join the line a little bit because it's not joined. There's a space. And I'm looking at this and oh, there's a gap there too. So let me close that up a little bit. Some of the lines are extending beyond where they shouldn't be. So I'm going to clean that up with the eraser tool. You know, there's a bit of extension here, which I don't really want. And I don't like this here. You know, but take a good look at it and see where it is that you need to fix it. And I'm noticing, obviously, that the bird is a little bit too skinny, and I still want it to be fatter. So I'm going to take the move tool and distort the bird from the bottom anchor point and move it up so that it looks a bit more chunky and more squished. And I also noticed that the eye and the beak are a little bit too high on the face. So I'm going to take the selection tool, select just the eye and the beak, and I'm gonna move that down closer to the cheeks. You know, and then I might take the white ink, change my color to white, take the brush and paint a little glistening eye effect, which is 2 dots on the eye. My lighting is going this way. 2 little dots on the eye to make it look cute. And then on the owl in the other video, obviously, not the video, the owl that I showed you, it has a V on its face. So you want to add that in too. You know, so let's add in the V. And this doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. It can be rough, a little rough. And I want this part of it to have color, so I want the belly to also be a different color. So I'll add in a little bit of a division here. And I still think the bird is, again, not fat enough. So I'm gonna distort it again and make it even squishier. Okay, so once you're happy with the line work that you've done, to me, let's just say I'm happy with this, although there are ears that you can add into, and the ears are just triangles. If you do want to add in ears, for this purpose we will not. You can start coloring it. You just go to your color palette and you choose a color that you want, whether it be brown, gray, blue, unicorn, colored, whatever you want. But for this one, we're going to do brown. So as before, you're going to want to trace and draw in the area like a coloring book. I mean, I'm coloring outside the lines, but I'll clean that up later. And then you're going to want to drag and drop the... Oh, that's what happens when there's a hole, and there was one right here. So drag and drop, and you get the color. And then I'll do it again here. Drag and drop, and then again here, and drag and drop. Now this doesn't necessarily have to be clean the first time, you can clean it up later, but for right now, you can leave it as is. So after you filled in the brown, what you want to do next is color in the next part. So you want to keep your colors on individual layers, so you'll create a new layer on top of the brown colored layer, and choose a color that's a bit lighter or whatever color you feel like choosing. I'm going to choose sort of a brownish orange color and fill that in. So you're going to do the same thing that you did with the other drawing, with the other color. And you're going to fill this part all in and try to stay within the lines. Sometimes I obviously go out of the lines because I have trouble controlling my pen. Okay, so let's go. Then you'll drag and drop to fill it. And then we're going to create another layer for the little rosy cheeks. I'm going to choose a pink color from the palette. I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to color in the pink. I don't feel like that's pink enough. Let's make it a bit darker. Then I'm going to create a separate layer for the feet, which I'm going to drag and drop it underneath the brown layers and all the other layers. Maybe make it a grayish color or a dark gray color. one of the things you can do is look at reference of owls to get the colors that are more owl-like. But once you have all the base colors down, and this is what it looks like, you'll want to determine where you want your light source to be. So this will determine what the shadows and the shading will look like when you color it. So say I decide that I want my sun to be here, or my light source to be here. So when it comes to a light source, obviously, if this is the sun, this is a horrible looking sun, but if this is the sun, then the light would be shining over here, which means all of the shadows and the shading would be on the left-hand side. And now that we've determined where we want our shadows to be, and we know that it's on the left-hand side, we can start shading in the drawing. So I want you to go back to the layers, go to the layer that's this brown color or whatever color you made it, create a new layer on top of that, tap that layer, go to clipping mask, and change the filter from the normal mode to multiply. What this does is create the same color on top of that layer that you colored on, but the multiply layer makes the color darker. So say I want this color, I will press down to sample the color, and it'll show up here, which means I have taken the color from here. And I'm gonna color over where the shadows should be. And so what that does from before is it takes the color, this color, and it overlays it on top, but it makes it darker because of the filter. So I know that my light source is over here and it's gonna be shining on the right-hand side of my owl. So all of my shadows are gonna be on the left. So I'm gonna create some shadows. And I like to do like a little feathery look, so I tend to use the Studio Pen tool to press down hard, then lift, then press down hard, then lift to make these little edges. And I'm gonna do that with the rest of the shading as well. And because I created a clipping mask on top of this, notice that it's not going anywhere else but where it's supposed to go, which is within the color block. So I'm gonna do the same here, and I think there should be a shadow here as well. And I'll color that in. And again, and I think there should be some shadows on his little tuft here. And a little bit maybe over here. And then you're gonna do this, you're gonna take this and bring the opacity down by 60. Simply because I feel like the shadow is a bit harsh. It's a bit too dark. So I just want to lighten that up, and 50 to 60 seems reasonable to me. You can do it however you like. And then you're going to do the same thing for the rest of it. So on top of the orangey brown color, you're going to want to do a new layer, clipping mask, and then go back to multiply. Then resample the color so that you have the same color as what's underneath, and do the same thing. Shade in all the areas here. Make sure that it's smooth. I feel like there should be a shadow here. And sometimes it's a bit of guesswork where you want the shadows to be. Sometimes, I do it wherever I feel like doing it. So I will judge how far the shadow should go, and I will color in that area. We'll just keep doing that. So there should be some shadow there, and there should be a bit of feathering here. And I think there should be a shadow here too, because the wing is on top of his stomach. And there should be some under his neck too. Make sure it's cleaned up a bit. You'll also want to do it to you also want to change the opacity, again, to the same opacity that you changed top one to. So I think I used 55. And then you'll do the same thing to the cheeks and the feet. So let's do that. Create the clipping mask, put the multiply, zoom in, resample the cheek, and make sure that clipping mask layer is on multiply. And add in some dark colors on the cheek. Now, if you notice that there is a space that's not colored, say here in the dark area where you colored, oh, there's a big space, why is that happening? You will want to fill in the normal layer when that happens. It means that you've missed a spot in terms of coloring, and even though the clipping mask is on top, it's not filling in wherever it's not colored. So you have to make sure that you colored in all the spaces for it to work. Now, I'm gonna do the feet. Same thing, clipping mask, multiply. Then zoom in and resample the color with your finger. Make sure your layer is on multiply. There should be a shadow underneath his belly. And then you're gonna wanna bring that into however much you want, so 55. And I feel like my bird should have little white tufts on his chest. So I'm gonna create another layer on top of all of the layers, because whatever layer you have on top is what color will show up. So if you have, say, the brown layer on top, that might go over the orange layer. So if you want to paint on top of the orange, it has to be on top of that layer. So I'm putting this layer on top of everything, and I'm gonna create little tufts on his fur. And what I mean by that is I press down, pull, press down, pull, press down, pull. And I can do this as much as I want. I'm gonna put as many as I want here, just to make it look a bit cuter. So once that's done, the other thing that I do is, knowing that the light source is this way, I'll put a little white highlight around the character. But before I do that, I'm kind of not satisfied with the way that there is no sort of texture to the feathers. So I'm gonna apply a texture to the feathers with one of the brushes that I had mentioned in the beginning. So where the brown area is, I'm gonna put a clipping mask on top of the multiply clipping mask that you had before. Select multiply, resample your color, and then pick the texture signet. Put your brush up to the fullest and paint inside of the clipping mask. So that looks kind of cool because it gives it a little bit more dimension, but it's still a little bit too rough, and I kind of want it to look more fluffy. This is where you would apply the Gaussian Blur. So you would go into the adjustments magic wandy looking thing and click Gaussian Blur. Then you want to blur the layer, you want to take your pen, move it along the screen. So you see a blue bar up here, and it will blur it however much you want, depending on how far you go on the canvas. I only want a little blur, so I'm gonna move it just slightly, then lift. And now the blur has made it more of a softer look. And after that, I'm gonna start applying that white highlight that I discussed before. So I'll go back to the top layer where these tufts are, and I'll take my studio pen, bring it down. I have to go back to studio pen. Bring it down in size a little bit and start adding in some highlights. So I know my light source is over here, so I want the white to be over here. And this is more of eyeballing it. I don't put white highlights, too much white highlight. I put a little bit just to give it some depth. And wherever I know that something is in front of something else. So this wing is in front of the stomach, and the light source would be hitting it a little bit. So I would put it here, just a touch. Maybe a little bit on the feet. I mean, you don't have to, but And then for the cheeks, I like to do the same thing I do for the eyes to give it a bit of a glisten. I put 2 dots in the cheeks. And that's your owl. That's what it looks like. One of the things you can do, as I said, you could put in the ears if you want, but this is how this one looks. Again, I did do the white background, but I prefer to do this type of background. I know I kind of forgot to do it in this one, but it does, like, it's not as harsh on the eyes when you use a pinkish background or a background that's sort of a peach color, something that doesn't hurt your vision. So once this is done and I want to share it to social media or I want to export it, I will go to the wrench tool over here, and there's a few different options. There's Procreate, PSD, PDF, JPEG, PNG, TIFF, and you can choose how you want it to be exported. So some people will draw their characters in PSD, and they'll draw the characters and they'll export it as a PSD, and that is a Photoshop file. So you can bring all of the layers in Procreate that you've drawn, bring it into Photoshop, and Photoshop has a myriad of other tools that you can use to finish off the drawing. So a lot of artists like to export it as a PSD and then finalize it in Photoshop. But if you're going to send it to social media or anything like that, you'll want to create either a JPEG or a PNG and save it into your album. So when you export, a box will come up like this. If you have AirDrop, AirDrop is for any iOS system. So if you have an iMac or iPhone, this is a handy tool. It will export to your phone or laptop or whatever you have immediately. If you have not an iOS, this is pretty much useless to you. You'd want to either message your JPEG to someone, email it, post it on Dropbox or wherever you choose to post it to, or you can save it to your gallery and send it to yourself later. But for now, I already saved my image, which is save image, into my gallery, so it's already there. That's why it keeps saying unsuccessful. There are other options within the wrench area where it says share. You can do animated GIFs, PNGs, MP4s, and things like that. Some people like to animate their drawings in Procreate. I have animated drawings in Procreate as well. I can show you that really quickly, like what that does, just so you can see. Hang on. So this is a drawing that I did that took, 2 or 3 days, an anime drawing, and I had animated this one as a GIF, or GIF, I don't even know how you pronounce that, but right now, when I exported it as a GIF, it was already animated frames per second, and you can change how fast that happens. So the blinking and the rain is happening at 6 frames per second, and then you would export that. This one I already finished, and it had a lot of layers, as you can see, for the animation. So one of the animations had to be, one of the drawings had to be your eyes closed, another one had to be your eyes half open, and then another one had to be your eyes fully open. And that's how you create that sort of animation. It's not easy to do. A lot of work is involved, and I will probably do a tutorial on that at some other date. But for now, the owl is what we are focusing on. And again, you want to export it under share. One of the coolest things about Procreate is that it can do time lapsing. And I love this feature because as soon as you do a time lapse, you can basically see where you went wrong while you were drawing. It's like looking at yourself drawing, but you're not actually drawing, and it's the weirdest feeling in the world to see your process being sped up like that. I usually export time-lapse video as a 30-second. You can also choose to view it as a full length. So that's another feature that it has. And yeah, that should be it. And hopefully you've followed along and you've watched the entire video and learned some things. And you now have a completed owl, hopefully. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.